Are you there, Marky?
Hey, Uncle Scott, thank you for having me. I think it was a genius idea for you to have me on your show. I mean, your ratings are going to go through the roof after having me on.
I hope so. I yeah, we'll see. So this idea of this phone call happened when Marky and I were talking on the phone. He did this lovely little. Let me tell you who he is first. So my nephew Marky is also known as Mark the Martian on his YouTube channel with 2,000 plus followers. He's an amateur filmmaker and he's just a lovely human being who looks at life through a different lens and a lens that I very much appreciate.
Thank you.
So, of course. So, we had a phone call, Marky and I. Marky, tell the listeners about what we talked about on the phone before this phone call.
Well, I came up with the idea to have the topic of conversation be my Grandpa Giro, your father, my father's father,
Hmm.
and his name was actually Ciro, but everyone called him Gyro. And it's just something I'm interested in lately is going back and studying and getting it on the record that we can have it on the record for good, some of our family history.
So, in doing research for my Italian passport, my dual citizenship, I learned that my father, on his passport, I mean, on his birth certificate, his name was Ciro, Ciro. But everyone knew him growing up as Gyro. So Giro, not Giro, but Gyro. So, in answer to that question that we were talking about, I'm not really sure how that happened, except that we had lots of friends that were not Italian and it was too hard to pronounce. I don't know. But he was known as Gyro. So,
Well, I find the meaning of names fascinating. One of the first
mhm.
people who got me into it was Grandma Jean,
Really?
and she actually bought all of us grandchildren a little plaque to hang on the wall that had the meaning of our name.
Ah,
And the meaning of my name, Mark, is warrior from Mars. And
oh,
I've always found that very empowering. And that's from Grandma Jean. And before this podcast, I went and did a little bit of research on the name Ciro.
oh,
And
okay.
it turns out it's a Greek and Italian name
Hmm.
that means of the sun or lordly.
Oh,
And it's
okay.
derived from the Greek word hieros, which means of the sun or lordly.
Oh, nice.
And then I looked up the name Scott. You know what that means?
Not much. Scotsman? I don't know.
You would think right away it must have something to do with Scotland,
Yeah.
which it does. It means a Scot, meaning from Scotland, or a Gaelic speaker, which I think Gaelic is Scottish language, but it also means the deeper meaning is wanderer.
Oh, that's perfect. I had no idea. That's honestly that I know. Wow. Um, sidebar. I grew up in Italian French family. As you know, and I was the only one of my siblings to not have dark hair and sort of olive skin. Not that we look like we're from Italy, but we're only second generation Italian, and I had blonde hair, blondish hair, and I was very fair skinned. And for the longest time, I thought I was adopted. And then I looked at old pictures. I'm like, oh yeah, that's stupid. But anyway, so let's try to see. I'm wandering.
No, you can see the resemblance. Like I was just looking at the early military photo of Grandpa Giro,
Yeah.
and he was extremely handsome.
Oh my gosh, I know.
And of course, you are extremely handsome too, and
Oh, go on. And so are
I can
you.
definitely see the resemblance.
Well, thank you. And so are you in inside and out. So let's let's talk about. So we talked about our topics right now are, my father's name, your grandfather's name, Ciro versus Gyro. Let's move on to. I want you to tell me the story that my father told you, your grandfather, about Normandy.
Okay, I'll tell you the one about the Normandy beach, which was known as D-Day. It was one of the most important battles in World War II. Pretty much everybody should know about it, even if they don't know anything about, war history or World War II. Almost everybody's heard of D-Day, and it was one of the largest invasions ever, if not the largest. Like, as far as just putting men on the ground on foot to invade a country. And uh, it was basically we were trying to beat the Germans, but the Germans had control of France, and we were trying to save England. We were allies with England, so we had this whole thing set up, and it was very secret. They, they released false information to try to cover it up that we were coming in, and because it, then when we finally did invade on that day, it was, just hundreds of boats all at once. That they were these, I imagine they were out at sea on these bigger boats, and then you can see it if you, there's been plenty of films made about it, but then they had these smaller boats that would carry, let's say, just 50 men shoulder to shoulder, like a boat full of nothing but men, ram that boat right up onto the beach. And the men would have to pour out. And of course, the Germans were extremely well prepared. They had the whole beach, the whole northern coast. I think it's the northern coast of France. They had the whole thing heavily fortified. They had barbed wire trenches, these big metal things that were like to stop tanks, and but then essentially it was a wide open beach, and then beyond the beach there was a hill. Like on most beaches there's a hill beyond it, and up on the hill the Germans had these heavily fortified gun emplacements with basically like cannons, but like modern day high rate of fire cannons, to where the Germans were blasting on them before they even set foot on the beach. They were picking off the boats as they came in, so be lucky to even hit the beach if your boat didn't get blown up first. I'm sure it was one of the most deadly battles in any recent history, as far as like a good amount of them died just trying to even set foot on the darn beach. Sometimes the cannon shot would come down and not hit the boat, but just make a big enough splash to flip the boat. And then the water was freezing cold, and they were wearing 100 pounds of gear, and if they fell in the water, they'd drown.
Oh, it's horrifying.
It was like a suicide mission.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Uh, and the mission was to get up that hill and take those fortified gun banks.
Right.
Well, they finally did eventually get up there, but so picture Grandpa Giro
Mm-hmm.
on one of these boats. He's he's probably been at sea for at least a week or two and away from home, maybe stationed in England. So you're already tired. You've been eating nothing but army rations.
Right.
It's cold, and you wake up one morning, we're storming the beach.
Mm-hmm.
So then he gets there. So he finally gets there.
And I have to interrupt. Like can almost bet that none of the soldiers knew the master plan. So they were told, we're gonna go here, we're gonna like climb up the dunes, and then we're gonna fight the Germans or whatever. But I'm sure that they didn't. They were not locked. They were not aware of just how dangerous this particular battle was. Now we can look at it with hindsight and know that D-Day was like the battle of World War II. But back then, I would be very surprised if the the generals and the colonels or whatever would say to somebody like, here's what we're going to do. It's going to be really, there was no details. They just followed orders. Like, we're going to get on this boat for however many days. We're going to land at this beach. We're going to like climb the dunes and then blah, 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 whatever. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah,
oh,
they didn't have GPS and they didn't have maps and Google Earth to even, like nowadays, even when I go fishing, I can Google Earth, look at the spot ahead of time and say, that's exactly where I need to be. Like they could have, if they had Google Earth, he could say, okay, the door to the gun battery is right there. We need to get to that exact door.
right.
But no, it was, I'm sure the only orders they got was take that hill, man.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So he gets there to the beach,
Mm-hmm.
makes it to the beach, which is a miracle in itself.
Right.
And then he says, so he gets there, and upon first look of the thing, he sees that it's a nightmare. But he realizes he has one crucial piece of equipment in his backpack, which is a shovel.
Yeah.
So he says, right away, he just takes out his shovel. I'm assuming he walked up the beach far enough to get away from where it was really wet, and um, and he takes out his shovel and just starts digging down. He says, "To heck with taking that hill. That's suicide. I'm gonna start digging down." And that's what he did. He dug down and made himself a little hole in the ground.
A little foxtrot.
But then, after not very long, they all wanted to get in there with him. And he says he ended up probably saving a bunch of their lives, the men that did get in there with him.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, like we talked about on the phone, it's astonishing that my father and his four brothers all went to World War II, all came back. And you mentioned something I thought was really important that, yeah, so there's bravery and then there's self preservation. Like my father saw what the deal was probably really quickly, probably before they even landed at the beach because it was still like this raging battle. And he's like, I'm going to do my best to not die in this, And
Yeah.
so there's a certain amount of smarts that he employed. And had he not done that, I would not be here, by the way, because none of us, and your father wouldn't be here. None of my siblings would be here. And so I think that's really fucking powerful. You got to do what serve your country. Oh, I'm going to make a little segue here that I think is important to mention, and I would love you to chime in on this as well. So my father was, I don't know, 18 maybe when he went to war, and I'm assuming he was enlisted because that's what you did. I've always regretted the fact that I wasn't old enough and or self-possessed enough to ask him exactly how it was that he was going to war and stationed in a country that was against us. How it was that he felt as an American, as first generation American, and not that far away from being an Italian citizen. His father was an Italian citizen when he was born, and then he's fighting over there um, against the country that he is from, essentially. And I wished I had talk to him about that. Did you ever think about that? Like, 'cause I didn't think about this until years later.
Yeah, I'm going through the same thing. I think it's a typical of a young person to, I don't know, just be full of yourself and whatever you're doing in your life, and not until later when you've had your own experiences of loss and near death experiences and traveling the world or whatever. And for me, I'm 36, I think, 35, I lose track. But like we just had grandma, my mom's mom, pass away here a year or two ago.
Dorothy,
And at the time, yeah, Dorothy. And at the time, all the way up until now, I don't know, it's just life evolving and
I think so too.
whatever. It wasn't until now that I'm interested in it. So it's not just you. I think it's a very human thing.
Hmm.
But but here's an interesting thing is this is getting into the deep philosophy of it. But I was just came across a philosophy piece the other day, which I'd heard before, but it made sense to hear it again. Is that in order to live your life to the fullest, at one point you should make a biography.
Mm,
Is that the word? You should write your story, write it out into a book. And you can't really know yourself even until you've written it out into a book.
I think that's
And when you do that, then your life will become even more clear.
right.
Well, I'm taking it even a step back. I'm saying, well, who am I? So now I need to know who he was. I need to know everything about him that I can find.
That's awesome. I think it's really like, to your point. I think you can only understand yourself by knowing something about where you come from, and what your father and grandfather and great grandfather went through to, in our case, and in many millions of people's case in this country, um, had to go through to get on a ship. And they were not, like with our family, they were not, on the Queen Mary or whatever, in upper class cabins. We were like steerage. Our ancestors came like rats, packed into the bottom of the bow of the ship. How many thousands of them died because it was just horrifying, because there were, back in 1900, that, people didn't fly. It was you went on a one way mission in the bottom of the bow of a boat, hoping that you and your family would survive. And so there's something really, as you say, understanding that part of your history, because if that didn't happen, I wouldn't be here, you wouldn't be here, none of our family would be here.
If he hadn't thought to take that shovel and dig down,
Exactly. Exactly. All right, listen. So, my military story, which is not really a military story for my father, the only story that I remember, my father's stationed in Italy, and I can't remember where, but it was somewhere in the south, I think. And he got some leave, maybe for a few days, and he walked into this small town. I remember him telling me this specifically, that there was this woman in the center of the square as he approached the village, on like a rocking chair. And she was beautiful, and she had like, black lace, a black lace headdress or something. And as he got up closer to her, because he was intrigued, and she looked at him and she said, "I've been waiting for you." And my father, my father's reaction was like, okay, not sure what that means, but I guess they talked a little bit, and his version of the story is that she was a witch and she knew of him coming to the town, and that's basically all I know of the story. And I should also mention the caveat that my father wasn't married. I don't think he was married to my mom at this point. um, he was, a bachelor in World War II, and maybe the witch was actually a prostitute, or and they had a lovely night together or something. But the story that he told us in front of my mom was this really lovely woman that he met in on leave during World War II, and it always stuck in my mind. And the reason why it sticks in my mind, I think, particularly, is because when I would go with my dad to his mom's house, Nani, we call her Nani. Also, let me explain that. So another Anglicization of my family was that in Italian, your grandma is called Nonna, Nonna, and your grandfather is called Noni, or Nonne with an E. Um, we called her Nani because it was easier to pronounce, I'm assuming. That may tie back into the whole gyro thing. I would go there with him once a week to visit his mom, my grandma, and I'm sure that he'd worked this out with her beforehand. I would, get there with him, and she would shuffle him off to the kitchen to have espresso, because she would make espresso and keep a jar on her fridge, on her oven. Like, back in the day, they had like pilot lights, and she would keep it on the center where the pilot light was to keep it sort of warmish. And everyone that came over would have an espresso. And then so she shuffled him off to the kitchen, and then she would take me into like a little side room, which was her sort of chapel. And she would say, she would whisper to me, "You want a little liquore strega?" And it was this thing that we did, like, yes. And this is, by the way, liquore strega means witch liquor. Strega is witch in Italian, and so it's something like 80 proof. It's really fucking strong. She would pour me a tiny little, like a third of a shot glass, and herself, and we drink it, and then we, sort of giggle and, put our hands to our mouth, and then we'd go back in the kitchen and resume the visit and stuff. And so every time I went there, from probably the age of 7 to the age of 13 or something, that was the thing. And as I got older, she would add like a few dollars. She would like stuff a few dollar bills in my pocket. And
Oh, she sounds like the best.
she was so cool, dude. Like, she lived to be, I think, 93. Every night before bed, she would rub olive oil on her face, rub it in, and go to bed. And I'm not joking, she was 93 when she died. She had minor crow's feet because she smiled all the time. And that was it. Her face, her skin, her face was gorgeous.
Hmm.
And she went through a lot, That's another podcast with her husband. But so that's a brief description of what it was like, growing up in this family that was very family centric and very Italian centric. My mom's side is French, and so there was also that. But that's, again, another topic. So the next topic I want to ask you.
Well, before we move on, let me say that I love that story, and thank you for sharing it. That is exactly the kind of story I'm looking for
Mhm.
from everybody.
Well, as we talked about on the phone like a week ago, why I think this is so important is because if we don't do this and have an audio record, history gets lost. And that's why I think what we're doing is crucial for every family, to find what you can about where you came from, even if it's just your parents, your grandparents. Um, get it on some sort of media, uh, because if you don't do it, nobody will. Like, as time goes on, we've seen this over and over again. People lose track of even just talking about a story that they heard about as a kid. The older we get, the more we forget. The more um, details are lost, and so that's why I feel like this is super important to do. So
Yeah, it struck me like a lightning bolt. Like it's almost like we're bringing him back to life.
yes,
Like almost in
yes,
a way, like they came back from the grave to say, Mark, you have an audience now. This is the chance to tell our story before it gets lost forever.
that's deep.
Because if you think back to like grandma's grandma's dad, Grandma Jean's dad, the Native American, I think his name was Dorr. We know virtually nothing about him because all the stories. This was before the internet and stuff, and if we don't tell these stories now, like you said, they'll be lost. And if right up until this podcast,
Yeah,
the world had no idea who Gyro was, other than us family. He's not on the internet, so he doesn't exist for all intents and purposes. It's like we're bringing him back to life.
exactly. All right, let me shift gears. I want to ask your third bullet point because I have no idea what this means and I'm dying to know. You wrote, "Don't eat the candy wreath, capiche?"
Yeah, that's just I have all these little funny memories of him in my childhood, and he must have been in his 50s or 60s at least at this time. But they had that house there in Gloversville, and it had 2 stories, and I'm not sure who was living upstairs at that time, but I mean, we used to have dinners there all the time, and that was some of my most fond memories of being a kid. Was we had these real authentic, like to me anyways, Italian family dinners where it was not just once a week, but it seemed like several times a week we'd get together at their house or Aunt Jerry's house and just have dinner. And Grandma would cook, and she'd make these things tadas. I've never seen anything like that. Yeah, they were like these crunchy bread things. I've never seen those the like of those anywhere else. But Grandpa had a wreath. It must have been around Christmas time or something, or maybe he always had it. But he had this wreath hanging on one of the bedroom doors that was full of these legitimate candy. Like I still remember they were delicious. They were this slightly hard candy,
And they had gel in the center, right?
yeah, and gel in the center.
Yeah, yeah.
And they came in this little wrapper, red
Mhm.
wrapper with green at the top that they looked like a little strawberry.
Yeah, yes, yes.
And they were on this wreath that was easy enough to pluck them right off of there. I don't know
Mhm.
how else to explain it, but
Yeah,
I mean, they weren't, it was almost like they were meant to be eaten. Why would you put candy on a wreath
exactly.
that wasn't meant to be eaten?
Exactly. It's like torture. Come on now.
And they plucked off with relative ease.
Yeah.
So I remember plucking off those candies and eating them, and then him coming in and catching me eating a few of them and saying, "Don't eat those, you capiche?"
Yes, yes. For the non-Italian folks, capiche is sort of like the Neapolitan um, word for capisco, which means understand. Don't eat the candy wreath. Understand?
Yeah, which is funny because I that's my one of my clearest memories of him, and I think it was more about him teaching me the word capiche than anything else.
Oh, interesting. Oh, okay.
But at the same time, he was telling me not to eat them.
Yeah. I, don't fuck up the wreath. The wreath is decorative. It's not to be eaten, even though it was made of like delicious candies. I remember those candies very clearly. All right, next topic. I need to ask you what the fuck, what you wrote on your one of your bullet points. Testing biceps with string.
Yeah, that's another story story from that house, from the dinners.
Okay.
The dinners, that's where a lot of my memories from him are. And even now, I'm thinking of a few more, but I won't bring them up. But
Write them down and we'll talk about it in the next session.
okay, well, the kitchen in that house was kind of an interesting kitchen. It was small.
Oh man, tell your story. I need to tell you about my experience with that fucking kitchen. Go on.
Okay, well, it was a small kitchen, and the bathroom. I'm just painting the picture a little bit. It was barely big enough to have a table in the center,
Hmm.
and then the ovens were along the side, and you would have to kind of walk around the table to come in, and then attached to the kitchen was the bathroom.
That's the part of the thing that I want to talk to you about, but go on.
When we would go to have dinner, a lot of times grandma would be in there cooking, and then grandpa would be at the table. So they would often be just in that little kitchen room.
Hmm.
And that's one of my other earliest memories of him was him showing me his bicep. And I must have only been 7 or something, but even back then I was pretty strong for a kid. Well, grandpa had a pretty impressive bicep. That's the muscle on your arm right there that
Yeah.
if you're real fit, it looks like a big lump on your arm when you curl your arm.
Yeah.
He had this method of tying string around it, and he would tie it real tight. And then the idea was to flex your bicep muscle and break the string.
Oh.
And then he would make me do it. And I remember I either couldn't do it or that it just hurt.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he did it with ease. He'd tie 3 or 4 of them around there and go, psh, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and break the strings and go, look, be like me.
No idea. Next question. Spilling salt. He wanted to smack me.
Yeah, that was another thing where I was kind of a little rebel or whatever, slightly mischievous, you might say.
Yeah.
I had a trick that I had seen somewhere on TV of. I even studied mischief. I would study all the comedians who did mischief. And there was one trick where you would take a salt shaker and unscrew the top to where when someone would go to,
Yeah.
when they go to pour it, it would spill out all over your, way more salt than you want.
I remember that. Yeah.
I did that to fall for it one time, and he got pretty mad and said to, I think it must have been mom and dad were sitting right there too, and he said, "Boy, if he was my kid, I'd give him a good smack right now."
Yeah. Yeah.
And I didn't get smacked, but uh, he said he would have if I was his kid.
I remember that. That's one I do remember actually. Oh, it's awesome. Let's talk about fishing. So, fishing hand-me-downs. Um, and there's three sub bullets. Marty loses lures, wobble right in quotes. Your dad's stories of pike trips, and early love of fishing.
Yeah, that is just really more than anything else, just the shared love of fishing.
Mm-hmm.
It comes clearly from my mom's father too. He was a big fisherman, but
Mm-hmm.
some, before I was young enough to know about him, I was there with Grandpa, and we'd go down into the basement, and he had a whole bunch of rods and tackle boxes, and I always wanted to go fishing with him because Dad would tell these stories of them taking trips up to Ontario and just having these amazing pike trips. Pike is a big type of fish that gets pretty big
Yes.
with big teeth, and they would go up there. Dad would tell me these stories of just having a blast fishing with Grandpa Giro. They'd go on these like weekend trips, and that was probably the one of the earliest ideas about fishing I had was Dad telling me about him and Grandpa, and I always would ask Grandpa to take me fishing, but for some reason we never got to go. I think that kind of by the time I was old enough to really want to go and not be too much of a burden, he was already sort of health declining, maybe, and
Oh,
I wished I could have gone fishing with him just once.
can I tell you my fishing story?
Yeah.
So unlike you, I'm, obviously much older, 20 years or so. And the one, I think I went fishing with my dad a few times, maybe two times. And the one trip that I remember specifically was, we're on some lake. I don't think it was Sacandaga. It could have been, Pine Lake or whatever, on a boat. And, he taught me how to cast the line, how to thread the needle. I remember one trip, he was explaining the basics to me, which included how to thread the worm on the needle. So you have to like pierce it, turn it, pierce it, turn it, pierce it so that it doesn't come loose. And I recoiled at that. It was just horrifying to me. And I remember him saying, like, just, deal with it, in his gruff way. And then whether it was that trip or another trip, I remember we were specifically fishing for bullhead catfish, essentially upstate New York catfish, and he was really descriptive in explaining to me, watch the whiskers, be very careful of the whiskers, don't touch them because they will cut you, like when you catch them. And I thought I had heard that, and I remember catching my first bullhead, reeling it into the boat. And the thing is, right out of the lake, and it was like the blackest black. It was the whiskers were so beautiful and shiny that I went to touch them, and I sliced through my middle finger, like the entire finger, because they're basically like three-dimensional razors. They're whiskers. And my father, of course, had to, like tourniquet, scramble to bleeding off and stuff. And it was very simultaneously very nurturing and very kind of,
The grittiness.
no, I mean, his my dad's reaction was very nurturing, but then once he got me wrapped up that I wasn't going to bleed to death, he's like, Jesus Christ, man, I told you not to blah blah blah. And it was like, okay, well, I think I'm 7 at this point, I don't know. So it was just like that was the last time he took me fishing because I was too much trouble,
Mm.
and I'm a little bitter about it, to be honest, because I really liked it was the only time that I spent with him, just him and me on a boat on a beautiful lake in the Adirondacks. And yeah, I didn't listen. I was mesmerized by the whiskers of this creature, and I don't know, it kind of sucks. It's kind of painful,
I'm
to be honest.
picturing it. Just real briefly about the catfish. Almost everybody who catches their first catfish gets cut by it.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it's almost impossible unless you're already an expert to not get cut by it. And that's why fishing is really a philosophical thing. You can learn so much from it, and just even that lesson there stuck with you forever. The lesson of
Mhm.
life and death, basically. And oh man, I mean, that was still a wonderful lesson for you.
Yes. What is Marty losing lures about? Wobble right.
Okay, so he had all this tackle in the basement, and I never got to go fishing with him. But I guess towards the end, he saw that Marty and I liked fishing,
Mm-hmm.
so he started giving away to us or gifting to us all of his fishing gear, mostly. I got a tackle box, and I think Marty got a whole tackle box full, and maybe even a couple rods. And I can't remember exactly what I got, but I was always at the time a little bit jealous because I thought Marty got the better tackle. He gave him this sectioned gaff thing, which he had another story about the gaff and grandma. There was this beautiful, like old world gaff. A gaff is a tool for landing a fish. I've never seen another gaff like that. It was sectioned, like, and you would screw it together. One of the things that he gave Marty was a lure called, and don't quote me on this because it's just my old memory, but I think it was called a wobble right,
Mm-hmm.
which is this metal lure. They're known as spoons. They sort of look like a spoon. Like picture if you took the end of a spoon and cut the handle off and then attached a hook to the back.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
When you drag that through the water, it kind of flutters and wobbles and flashes.
Right.
And those were the lures that they used to use on the pike trips. So these lures were important, and they were heirloom. You can't buy lures like that anymore. There might be that company around still. I'd be surprised if it was, but they were like old world treasures, these lures. And I remember then that was Marty's favorite lure was the wobble right, just because Grandpa had given it to him. And then I remember we went out one time to our favorite spot at Lock 12 and
At where?
Lock 12 on the Mohawk River.
Oh, okay.
Within a few casts, Marty got it snagged. It's very easy to get anything snagged there because there's just so many rocks and
Yeah.
snagged the wobble right lure. It was a beautiful lure too. I wish I could take a picture of it. He got it snagged on the bottom and lost it. And then I just remember him being like totally destroyed, like saddened beyond belief that he had lost Grandpa's wobble right. I remember him saying, "That was Grandpa's lure. And I'll never get it. There'll never be another one like it. And I lost it. And I'm so sad." And he went and sat in the car, didn't want to fish the rest of the day.
Oh my God. End of the world. Oh man. See those I love these stories, man. Um, okay. Oh, secret Christmas presents at the mall, driving back, counting headlights.
Yeah, that there was a mall that was like an hour or two away. I want to say Crossgates Mall or something.
Oh, in Albany, yeah.
Yeah, it was in all. So that was the closest really mall we had,
Mm-hmm.
and especially in the middle of winter, that was kind of a long drive,
Yeah.
across snowy, icy roads, and they would Grandma and Grandpa would take us grandkids out there for around Christmas. They'd take us one at a time to the mall. So they had to do this for all of the grandkids, and they took me there by myself, and then we would walk all around the mall and kind of take note of whatever I wanted or whatever I
Oh, so it's like a recon mission for Christmas
yeah,
presents.
and then they would say, "Okay, Mark, you go with Grandma and just go sit in the car, and Grandpa will be right out." And what he was doing was going and buying whatever it was that I had
Oh my God.
picked out, but it was a
Ah,
secret
ah,
because it was going to be Santa actually giving it or whatever.
right.
And then even the ride home, Grandpa would play this game where we would count cars without two headlights or cars with only one headlight.
Oh, okay.
Some which in an hour long drive you'd really only see two or three of them maybe,
Mm-hmm.
but it was kind of like it. Some people count how many Volkswagens do you see or something
That's
kind of
what I
like
did as
that.
a kid, dude. That's what I when you mentioned that, like that's what I remember doing as a kid because they weren't that common when I was a kid. And the Beatles.
Yeah,
Oh wow.
but as a kid that totally entertained me, and it was a brilliant strategy on his part to just sort of keep me occupied for the car ride. He'd say,
Yeah.
"Okay, Mark, we're going to count the one headlights on the way home," and I would diligently sit there and like look at all the cars and count them, and oh, there's one, and by the time you knew it, we were home.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
So I suspect that he knew your character enough to know that you would be diligently looking and preoccupied. And since, we're talking, there was, pre cell phones, pre iPhones, I mean, iPads, he had to come up with something that would keep you occupied and engaged. And he knew your
yeah.
character enough to know that you would actually sit there and actively.
Well, not only that, but he made it fun. Like every time we would see one, he'd go, "Wow, oh, so cool." Yeah.
Oh man. Oh, I'm getting emotional. Um, all right, last topic, and then we'll end this one, and there's many more to come. Last topic: how to cut paper without scissors.
This is another one of my favorite memories of him. I think it might have been during one of those mall trips. We also went to like a restaurant or something along the way. And at the restaurant, I think he demonstrated on a napkin, or maybe there was back in the day, they had those child menus, which was more like printer paper,
Mm-hmm.
paper.
Mm-hmm.
He had a method of, he goes, "Let me show you something. This will be useful." And he had a method of cutting paper in a perfectly straight line with no scissors.
Oh, okay.
And
I think I know what this is, but go on.
you know what it is? Yeah, what you would do is you'd fold it and then take your nails and crease it really good in a nice straight line. Then you would lick with your tongue along that crease, then fold it back the other way and crease it real good and lick it again. So then you had this perfectly like wet and creased line going down, and you could tear the paper and it would tear in a perfectly straight line. And
Oh,
I can't tell you how many times, not so much these days, but throughout my school days, all the way up till through college, how many times I used that.
oh my God.
And every time I would use that, whoever I'd show it to would go, "Wow, I'd never seen paper cut that way."
What a what a beautiful memory and legacy, you know, to carry forth into your adult life. Ah,
Let me squeeze one more story in, which is just real briefly. Grandpa at the gas station knocking somebody straight through the glass door.
oh, okay, okay,
Um, that really illustrated to me sort of Grandpa's character. And back in the day, you didn't mess around, or he'd throw you straight through the glass door.
exactly. Woof.
I mean, he had the biceps to do it.
Before we end it, if you wouldn't, if you want, like tell people how to get a hold of you. I can put it in the notes, like links and stuff.
Yeah, I go by Mark the Martian, one word, Mark the Martian on YouTube. So if you just type in Mark the Martian, one word, you'll find me. And that's pretty much my only online presence. But if you go there, I have a whole bunch of videos, like hours and hours. You can see my whole life. And that's where I'm going to eventually be posting the video documentary about Grandpa Giro sometime next year, I'm thinking. So everybody look forward to that.
Thank you. This has been amazing and more to come. And I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Thank you for having me. This has been really fun.
Awesome. Love you.
Love you. Bye.